Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their craft and more. My name is Edith and joining me from across the pond is scientist and fiction author Jennifer Handler. Hello, Professor, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Edith. It's great to be here.
It's lovely to have you on the show, and also thank you for being so accommodating because we had to switch dates, and it's really appreciated.
I'm glad it worked out.
So am I. So I have read on your website that it's Agatha Christie who has to answer for your love for fiction, but mostly crime fiction or thrillers.
Yes, that was an author my mother read for many, many years. So growing up, she often had an Agatha Christie book on our nightstand or in our coffee table or somewhere like that. She still is an avid reader, 99 and a half years old, and she's still an avid reader.
Oh, well, good for her, I say. Good for her. And your day job is not a detective, is not a private investigator, but you are a neuroscientist.
I am. And I teach courses at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, which is in the Midwest of the United States.
Oh, and you incorporated your day job in your first book. And what can you tell our listeners about your book without giving too much away, of course?
So, my book is somewhat of a coming of age story about a young woman who stumbles upon this revolutionary new discovery, which is in fact CRISPR gene editing. And that is a real technology. In the year 2020, two female scientists actually uh, got the Nobel Prize, were awarded the Nobel Prize for CRISPR gene editing. And when I realized that this revolutionary discovery was made, I noticed that not a lot of people knew about it. So in the college classroom, of course, we knew about it, and people who work in with genetics and in the healthcare profession knew about it. But just the average person, really, if you asked your neighbor on the street, have you ever heard of CRISPR gene editing? They really hadn't. So I thought, what a better way to introduce this technology and educate and inform than through a story, through a fictional story. So my story is about a young woman who kind of stumbles upon this discovery, and she realizes at one point that although it can be used for incredible, wonderful medical advances to help with different diseases, like Alzheimer's, for example, that's one of the diseases that I speak about in the book, or that's in the book. It can also be used for not so great things. So if you think of things like the book by Aldous Huxley years ago, Brave New World, where you could make perhaps a class of people that maybe didn't have as high of an IQ, or other people that had a much higher IQ, kind of like the eugenics movement. And when you think about it, we have every gene in the human genome mapped right now. And the beauty of CRISPR gene editing is that we're able to target efficiently each gene in the genome, or actually in the plant genome, and really any genome that we have mapped. So it can be used not just for healthcare, but for, to try and tackle global warming and other issues too. So we can use this technology then to hopefully go in and target genes that maybe we can knock out genes that can cause problems or diseases. We can upregulate genes that might be helpful to help prevent diseases or help cure diseases. But you could also, in theory, go in and target genes that might make a person, have blonde hair and blue eyes, or be more athletic, or maybe have a higher IQ. Now, those things are a lot harder to do because they're multifactorial. So, well, maybe not the blue eye thing, but a lot of the traits are multifactorial. It's more than one gene. This is at the time best used for things that we know that maybe just one gene can cause it, or a few genes. So, for example, early onset Alzheimer's, we know that there are primarily 3 genes that are involved in that. This is not the late onset that most people get later in their 70s or 80s. This is one that's much more highly hereditary that people get more in their 60s or even 50s. So that's the kind of the Pandora's box that we face with this new technology. It's has tremendous potential for curing human disease, but it also has the potential for abuse. And that's kind of the point that I wanted to get across, just for people who maybe are non-scientists, if they can understand through a story that there is this technology that is out there now, and it's being used for a lot of great stuff, but we need to make sure that it doesn't get into the hands of some bad actors that might want to use it for some not so good things. And that's kind of the premise of the story.
And that is always the question with things like that, isn't it? I mean, we have the hard science on the one hand, and we have the ethical questions on the other. I mean, what can we do? What should we do? And you have touched upon Huxley's book, Brave New World, and you only shortly mentioned eugenics. I mean, wasn't that the idea behind this whole eugenics movement and the idea behind the Nazi ideology? How to breed a better race, quote
Yes,
unquote?
absolutely. And there is a documentary that came out. It's called Human Nature. It came out some years ago. And there's footage of Vladimir Putin saying, with gene editing technology, could we use it to make kind of a super soldier, someone who is more immune to pain or might have more of a violent tendencies or things like that. And again, that's a bit, I don't even want to call it science fiction. I want to call it speculative fiction, because in truth, you probably could start to target genes. I mean, we do know that there are some genes that are involved with more violent behavior. We are aware. We don't know the whole story yet, but it was really chilling in that documentary when they had this footage of him. I think it was around 2017 when he was speaking to some crowd and said, "Well, you know, could this be used for things like that?" There's also been commentary. There's a journalist, George Will, who writes a lot for the Wall Street Journal, and George F. Will.
Mm,
And a few months ago, he penned a story about using gene editing for biological warfare. So, could you edit a virus that could be highly virulent and highly pathogenic and something that we wouldn't know about? And so, the beauty of this technology is that it's not hard to use, it's not expensive. It's not like, nuclear weapons where you'd have to go out and get uranium and, build these huge factories. High school kids, probably in Austria and the United States now, are probably learning about CRISPR and in their laboratory doing CRISPR with plants or with fruit flies or something like that. It's
mhm,
like you do need to have special laboratory equipment, but it's not really that hard to do and to be able to do. And what we're using it for now, which has really been working well,
mhm,
is for what I kind of call the low hanging fruit. So for diseases that maybe just have one or two genes that can be corrected that you can help with. So sickle cell anemia is one such disease that there's a treatment called Casgevy, where they use sickle cell, where you
mhm,
people with sickle cell anemia, they'll take their blood cells out, they'll do gene editing. They actually don't fix the hemoglobin gene. They flip an enzyme that allows the person to express their fetal hemoglobin, which is not mutated. And it's really been, and then they put those cells back in.
mhm,
They can
mhm,
infuse the cells back in. So that's been working very well. They're using it for some types of blindness where they can actually inject it into the retina and so do it in adults. But there was a scientist, Shaiku He, and I probably mispronounced that. It starts with a J. But back before even the Nobel Prize was won for this, when it was early on, he's a biophysicist from China, and he used CRISPR gene editing to edit a protein. It was called the CCR5 protein in human embryos. And these children were born, and now they're about 6 or 7 years old, I think, and they're doing great. But his idea was to edit this gene so that they would be immune to HIV. And
mm,
I don't know, I don't know I don't know the upshot if they actually gave the kids HIV to see if it worked, but this was the first time ever that gene editing was done in an embryo, and they used in vitro fertilization then,
Mhm.
and a surrogate mother, and the children were born. And now we're talking about making a permanent alteration in the genome. And that's a lot different than just doing it in hematopoietic blood cells that you would put back
Yeah.
in to someone, or in retinal cells that you inject. Now we are passing down a heritable trait to the next generation. And that brings in all kinds of ethical questions about, should we be doing this?
Hmm.
And does the child even want this done? Is it okay for the parents to decide this? And so there's a lot of questions, and he was really shunned by the scientific and medical community, and I believe he served 3 years in either in prison or in detention, had to stop working for a while. He's back working again. I think he's working on muscular dystrophy, and I do think he is using, human embryonic stem cells, but he has said, "I will not then,
Mhm.
do in vitro fertilization and have children from this."
Yeah.
But this is something we need to think about, really.
Yeah. I think I've read about this case you just mentioned, and on the one hand, it's scary. On the other hand, like you said before, there is hope to, I don't know, find a cure or get rid of diseases. And one could argue that all scientists do in this case is helping evolution a little bit along, giving it a gentle shove, maybe not so gentle in some cases, but otherwise, why not? On the
Mhm,
other hand, like you said, and I also pose the question, what should we do? The ethical question. Although we can do it, should we do it?
mhm,
And who then? You said it's quite easy. It's fairly easy, unlike uranium and building the bomb. It's not so easy. Get your hands on what you need to build a bomb, but
mhm,
you can do this kind of science fairly easy. It's not that expensive. But what if we have the right people who have enough money who do it on a bigger scale? And just for a certain group of people,
mhm.
maybe. I'm not talking about transgender mice here. Uh, is that something?
Right,
I mean, you said speculative fiction. I always feel that real life is far more fascinating, scary than anything fiction can come up with.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I there is a little bit of sci-fi. I do in the book, I say that they can, edit some genes to make the cell cycle go quicker so that adults you can go from baby to adult quicker, like, that's one of their thoughts. I can't see that ever happening. I think that, we would end up with cancer before that would happen. But, some of the genes that I actually I have kind of at one part, I have a scene where the protagonist goes into the laboratory and finds a spreadsheet on a computer where the not so good people, the bad guys, the bad actors, want to use her technology that she discovered, which is CRISPR Cas9, which is the fictional part of the book because two other scientists actually did discover it. But I have some genes in there and it says right on the spreadsheet what they want to use it for. And some is for people like mercenaries, to have soldiers that could be stronger and immune to pain and have more violent tendencies. Um, One of the genes I have is a 5-HT, I think it's a serotonin or dopamine gene and this is a really kind of scary, uh, to maybe make women more sexualized or something for the sex trade. So that would be that's kind of my Margaret Atwoodish type of part to it, I think, where you could really use it for a lot of different things, not just blonde-haired, blue-eyed, smart children that are athletic, but it could get pretty ominous, and again, those are a lot of those things are multifactorial traits, so it wouldn't just be flipping a switch with one gene. But it could be used for some detrimental things. But we don't want to just throw it out because it can be used for so many wonderful things, and it's being used for so many wonderful things right now. The what makes it difficult is when it's is trying to get it into the body. So it's one thing to be able to take bone marrow cells out of you know, out of your body and fix the gene in culture and then put it back in, do it like a bone marrow transplant or blood transfusions. It's a lot harder for, like, say, a solid tumor for cancer, because what vehicle would you use to get your CRISPR cassette into that specific area? So that's what people are really working on now, is how to get it into the body. And but they're using it a lot too, even just for transplants. So liver or kidney transplants from animals like pigs, if they can engineer the genes that make the proteins that would make us reject the transplant, then we would have a much more success at having a successful transplant. So there's a lot of really great stuff to use it for. And I don't think anyone feels that it should be illegal to use, because it's just so promising and people are using it for many, many different things. I actually heard Jennifer Dowda speak a month or two ago at a conference, and she was talking about just using it to engineer genes for like the methane that cows produce, which contribute a lot to global warming. So if you could do it, make cows that don't produce as much methane or something that would cause global warming, or maybe for trees or plants that would be better at utilizing the CO2 and producing better oxygen. So, it really has tremendous promise. And I think even with the concerns, we still need to pursue it and to use it. But we need to know what we're getting into so that we can mitigate things if they go awry. That's basically the way I think about it.
Yeah. And you said super soldiers, physically stronger than your average person, and also maybe more intelligent than your average soldier. So I suppose theoretically, is it also possible to make people less intelligent then? If you have a class
Yeah.
of super soldiers, you might also have a class of people who are less intelligent, who can be used for manual labor.
Yeah, and there's the Aldous Huxley Brave New World reference.
Yeah.
And again, I right now we don't know what gene causes people to be intelligent. We don't, and that's where we're into the kind of the speculative fiction, right? But there are certain things that we know, like in mouse models, we do know that there are some mice that are more vicious than other mice are, and there's some genes that we know that seem to contribute to that. So, that's where my speculative fiction comes in. Can we use it for things like that? But we're learning new things every day, and I can see that in the future that it's possible that this could be used for something like that.
A scary thought. But like you said,
But my book,
fiction. Yeah, yeah. But yeah.
yeah, my book really is. It's not scary like that. It's pretty heartwarming. It's about a young woman, and you learn about her family. She has
Mhm.
a close-knit family. She has fun-loving friends that she meets. She's from the Midwest. She goes to New York City, and it's her college year. She has a lot of fun, and she kind of stumbles upon this discovery, and then she's faced with this daunting decision. Once she realizes that uh, she wants to use it for good, and it doesn't even cross her mind
Mm.
that anyone would want to use it for anything bad, until she realizes that there are bad actors out there that do want to use it. So now the story turns and gets very suspenseful. She needs to find a way to thwart her more powerful adversaries,
Mm.
save her family, kind of run away and start a
Yep.
new life, and be able to. She's really got this decision. Now, do I destroy this technology? Because I have the key to it.
Yep.
The protagonist.
Mhm.
It's on her laptop. She knows the secret to it. The bad guys want the secret. She doesn't want them to get it. But there's a storyline where her father has early onset Alzheimer's, and she knows she could use it to help him. So now the question is, should she destroy it so it can never get into the wrong hands
Mhm.
again? Or should she get away from the bad guys, keep it, and try and help her own dad with it later on? So about the first part of the book, you're kind of getting to know the protagonist,
List.
her family, her parents, her friends, she falls in love, they travel a bit. It's kind of a very sort of heartwarming coming of age, almost women's fiction novel. And then get about halfway through and it just takes a turn.
Yeah.
And we find out that she's very, very resourceful in thwarting her adversaries and trying to save the day.
Mm,
And that's what I was trying to do, just to kind of grab the reader and, sneak in a little bit of science. My friends that have read it, they're like, yeah, we just skip over.
your friends were skipping over the science part?
Yeah, they were kind of more into the storyline. And when I actually talk about, AGCT and mRNA and DRNA and, enzymes, they're like, yeah, we just kind of glossed over that. But they were more into like, what's going to happen? Is she going to save the day? So it does have some, I do explain the science.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this is what CRISPR is. These are the major components of it. This is how it works.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions because we have to tackle a lot of questions here because you are not the first scientist on the show, and it's always a lot to ask of a scientist when they have to write fiction and tone it down, not too much, because people should be challenged, I suppose. Because I had this conversation with a friend of mine, she's also a scientist, and yeah, please, people are not that stupid. Trust your reader; they can handle it. And
Yeah.
I mean, yours is medicine. Hers was also um, what is geology, and there was science. There was this political thriller, and what about weapon systems? Don't get me wrong, I don't know anything about weapon system. I can skip
Mhm.
over that. I was mostly interested in the political part of it, but hey, why not? I mean, I can
Yeah.
handle it. I can handle everything else. So why not? And this is a question I wanted to ask you. I mean, as a scientist, uh, how much did you have to tone down for to not lose the audience? I mean, sometimes I get the impression that publishers feel the need to tell the authors, oh, not too much because, and they do not trust the audience or they underestimate the audience, the reader. Would you
Mm.
agree that that's sometimes the case?
I full That's what happened to me. I had a professional editor edit it, and she gave me great advice, and I'm so grateful because there were things that I changed because of her advice. But that is one thing that she said. She was kinda like, you bring that up again and you say it, you might not need to put so much in." And I kinda made the executive decision to just be like, "Well, but I'm going to do it. This is kind of the whole reason why I wrote it. It wasn't
Yeah.
just to write a fictional story. It was to really get the science out. And I agree with you. I think nowadays, don't underestimate the reader and don't underestimate Google. I mean, it's so easy to read a book and then just like, oh, what's this? And you click on it, and all of a sudden the picture comes up, and this is DNA and this is RNA, and it's easy to quickly fact
Mm,
check things and see things. And I think people do that frequently.
mm,
So I decided to kind of leave it in. There's another part later in the book where the protagonist goes to a big international conference in Europe, and she's talking to or the principal investigator, and he's saying, okay, explain to me what you're going to present
mhm.
so that people, this is huge, outside of genetics can understand. And she goes through it again. And the editor was like, you already kind of went through all this, but people also don't read books all in one setting too. So
True.
if you bring it up in chapter 3 and then you don't talk about it again until chapter 10 or 20, it's not a bad thing to have a little review.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree, especially if you're not a scientist. It might not hurt to hear it again or read it again in this case. Yeah, I absolutely agree
Right.
with you there. And great, you did it. I mean, good for you. And also for the book. And another question I have is your character. You said the first part is a coming of age, then you have her discovering this science, and she realizes there is also an interest from the bad guys. Maybe she should have read her Agatha Christie, then she would have known, don't trust anyone. But you know what I mean. Um, uh, where did she come from? I mean, the usual question would be, is she modeled after you? I suppose not. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But uh, where did you get the idea for this character? Is she based on a little bit on you, maybe on someone else, or what can you tell us about your character, your main protagonist in this story?
Yes. So, I at the university I teach, there's an author, a best-selling author, Thritney Umagar, and I went to one of her talks early on, and she said, "When you write your first book, write what you know." And so I think that my main character is kind of a mishmash, a kind of a conglomerate of a little bit of things that I went through, things that I knew other people did. There's a little bit of my daughters in there, and it's just kind of I think the whole book actually is pretty much, based on a little bit of different people that I've known all along. So the main character, Aaliyah, um, and without giving too much away, she's very tall, and as a young lady, she sees it pretty much as a curse that she's always taller than all the other kids, and she's always taller than, like, the boys in school, and she thinks, "Oh, I'll probably never have a boyfriend, I'm always too tall." And that kinda makes her a little bit of a she feels like an outlier, and, my daughter, is quite tall, and I saw her go through that first stage, and then it was kind of the same thing happened as she kind of, got a little bit older into her teen years. The questions changed from, "Wow, you're really tall. Are your parents tall? Do you play basketball?" to, "Are you a model?" And that happened to her, so that's kinda based on a little bit of her life, and we did go to a big, modeling and talent, competition in New York City, and she did quite well in it, but then she decided not to pursue modeling. So that foundation is a part of what the main character goes through. She has this kind of transformational part of her life where she goes from feeling kind of like an outcast to really gaining a lot of confidence and then decides not to pursue modeling and gets into science. Now my daughter didn't get into science, but so there's that little part in there. And then I kind of took it a little bit with some of the things that I did. I actually did do research at the Jackson Laboratory in Bar Harbor, Maine, which I make a fictitious name about. I call it ARC Labs. So I have that, just the whole experience of living in this part of the country in the Northeast on the Atlantic coast, where there were mountains and rivers and just a beautiful, beautiful area. But there is one of our major research facilities in the United States, and it's a mouse facility that many people use. They order genetically engineered mice from there. So I worked up there for a while when I was in my early 20s also. So that kind of came from personal experience. Um, After that, it really wasn't. I know I had a friend who said, "Did you ever meet another older famous investigator that kind of didn't treat you very well?" And I said, "No, that was all made up. I didn't that wasn't true." So some things I made up, some things are based on true things. The protagonist, Aaliyah's parents, her father's a carpenter, and as I mentioned earlier to you, my dad's a carpenter. So a lot of that, some of the things that he would say, I use in the book. So he would say, "Measure twice, cut once." Or he would say, "This job's gotta be done right because it has my name on it." And so those are things that I kinda modeled the Aaliyah's father off my father a little bit, and my dad had Alzheimer's too. He had late onset Alzheimer's, not early onset Alzheimer's, so I experienced the heartbreak of that, of watching him go through that, and that made it easier for me to write about that. Some of the stories that happened, actually were kinda true. There's a couple things in there based on him. So, yeah, I just wrote what I knew, the science and, like, the personal stuff, but not entirely. It's not like a memoir or a biography.
Yeah. And since coming from the science community, like I said before, the hard science, because that's what you are. I mean, I've
Mhm.
studied history, not any of the other hard science. Not that history is that easy, mind you. Um,
Oh, I know.
it's sometimes even more tricky than your field of research, I suppose. But anyway, coming from this field of work and then writing fiction. Um, what was your greatest challenge when you started writing fiction, in contrast to writing an article for a scientific journal or writing a scientific book?
My greatest challenge, it was kind of fun to be to be honest with you. Both have similarities. So I had to do research, right? So if they were in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, I wanted to make sure that I could capture that environment. So there's quite a bit of they go to different places. They go Jamaica is in there, different parts of the United States. They go to Paris, or she goes, I should say, to London. So I had to make sure that I was doing the research to be able to capture that environment, even little things. So like when you get on the tube in London, they'll say "mind the gap" or something like that that we wouldn't say in the United States, or ring them up if they're on the phone, or they call the bathroom the loo. And there's a point in the book where she's at the airport trying to get away from the bad guys, and she goes to the loo, not to the restroom, which is what we would call it. So in that sense, I had to make sure that I was trying to capture the essence of what was in that community or that environment. So that was probably the most challenging thing, to make sure that I wasn't getting it wrong. So I don't want to tell you all the different places that they kind of run and hide to, but I wanted to make sure that I was able to capture the the people and the environment, and just, I mean, even here in the United States, the Midwest is different from New York City, is different from Los Angeles, just in and is different from the South, with different slang and the way we say things and accents and stuff like that. So I just wanted to make sure I was could adequately capture and appropriately capture all the different environments. That was probably the most difficult.
I can imagine sounding or making it sound authentic when you speak to someone from the United Kingdom. It's quite a challenge, wouldn't it be? I mean, you have the same language, you are divided by the same language, like we and the Germans.
Exactly. And there's certain colloquial terms that you
Yeah.
might say that they would not say, and so I wanted to make sure I was, and the food too, just a lot of the cultural aspects. I wanted to make sure I was getting right.
I can imagine that. I mean, you are safe and sound where science is concerned, but this is I get it. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Also making it easy for your audience, for the reader, and you probably don't want to explain things. I mean, as a
Mhm.
writer, when you know your stuff, you're taking it for granted because you know what
Mhm.
you mean, what you're talking
Right.
about, even if it's something small like a building. What is this building, and what does it mean, or where is it, and what it looks like, and what it never was, and so on. It's clear for you what you're talking about. Doesn't mean it is absolutely clear for your audience. And how much explanation to put in? How much did you have to scratch from your writing because there is too much explanation, or you know so much and you want to get it all in, and yet it would make it maybe tedious for your reader, and you realize you have to scratch it out and uh, um, shorten it because it's too much, because you know it, but then you have to take the editing pencil and get rid. How much of
Mhm.
that had did you have to do?
Well, I had to do a lot of that, and I think one of the things that is helpful is that I teach. And I teach right now second-year college students in one course, and a big physiology course, and I also teach an upper level neuroscience course. So, you have to do a lot of that when you teach, like what's important, what are you gonna keep, who do you pitch to? My one course is over 400 students, and they're coming in with different backgrounds, so I have to decide how am I gonna explain this so that the majority can understand it without losing the students that are way out in front that have already had a lot of experience with these topics, and the students who haven't had much experience. So I think that that was helpful when I wrote it too. I realized that I didn't wanna go on and be wordy, but just kinda cut to the chase and then try and keep it interesting. And again, kudos to my editor who was able to help rein me in on that and make sure that we kept the story moving along. And, she suggested moving some things around and kind of starting it at different points. And that was really helpful.
I guess it is, and it's very helpful to have a good editor. But writing science is still something quite different from writing creatively.
Mhm.
And um, where do you think is your strong side as a fiction writer, not as a science writer? Would you say that it's easy for you to describe scenes, the environment, or would you say it's easier for you to write dialogue?
I probably the environment. Every place that they go to is a place that I've either lived or been to. So I did have a sense of the awe of the different places. And of course, living in Bar Harbor for a while, I was able to tap into that type of community because it's the Northeast is quite a bit different than even the Midwest or the South. So I think, to be honest with you, Edith, it was enjoyable. It was kind of fun. It was a fun ride to just when you're a fiction author, you can just make stuff up, you can make the villain really creepy, you can make the, protagonist, the main character, I mean, she was beautiful. She was tall and lean and fit and, kind of warm and nice, and I could make her roommate, her sidekick, who was, kind of funny and always cracking jokes, and the 2 of them they had each other's back. So, it was really enjoyable to write the fiction because you could just be so creative and think up new things. And I would talk to my kids about it sometimes, and they're like, "Oh, mom, my youngest son had the idea for how to turn things in the book," and it was something that I had not thought of. So it was really that was interesting to talk about it with other people and get other ideas. And even now that this book is written, it leaves it on a little bit of a cliffhanger, and a lot of people will say, "Well, what's the next book? What's the next book gonna be about?" And I say to them, "What do you think it should be about? What would you like to see happen in the next book?" And they have great ideas. "Oh, you should make, the son and the daughter have this happen or go back to America," or and they have all these great ideas. So, the fiction part was really, really enjoyable to write.
Mm. Writing dialogue is sometimes not that easy though, is it?
Yeah, the dialogue I think was harder. I like to write the environment, when
Mm,
they go to different places and stuff. Yeah.
More like Tolkien.
Mhm.
Describe your scene, the travels of the fellowship, and so on.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. I was trying to get that, and that's one of the things I get with reviews. They say it's very descriptive. They like the description, so they feel like they're in that place. If they're walking the beach in Florida, or if they're in Midtown Manhattan in New York City, or if they're taking the tube in London, how is that different? Or Paris. And again, my editor was great at that. She said at one point I was so focused on just Aaliyah, the main character, escaping, and my editor said, "You completely she's in Paris, Jennifer. You need to describe Paris, the beauty of Paris, and you're not doing that at all." And I'm like, "Of course, yes, I will do that." And I went back and rewrote that because in my head, I was so focused on her mental state at
Mm,
that point.
mm,
How am I gonna get away from the bad guys?
yeah.
Bad things are happening all around me. I'm in deep water. People are after me, and I'm not thinking about she's in Paris. So I wrote about the beauty of Paris, but I also wrote that she didn't notice any of it because she was so in
Mm,
her head. But of course there was the grandeur of Paris. There was the wrought iron
yeah.
fences and the cobblestone and the
Yeah.
Arc de Triomphe and, all the beautiful parts of Paris.
Yeah, but not also the beautiful parts, because I suppose you had to look up maps
Oh,
and
totally.
yeah, and get it right. Where are they and how did they get there? It's not that easy if you have never been there or have never lived there.
Yeah, I've been to Paris, but I've never lived there, but you're right. I was Googling, like, how far is this distance? What's near it this? What street would you be turning on? I did that for New York too, even just
Mm,
if they're walking down on 55th and they wanna go to Rockefeller ice skating rink, like, what would they turn right or left or
yeah.
and how many miles is this? How long would it take her to get
Yeah.
from point A to point B if she were driving? Or, how many days would pass? Things like that. You really had to
Yeah.
think about all the nuances because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
People are like, well, how could she be in Paris one day and the next day, it had to all make sense about the time. How long
Yeah.
does it take to fly? You know?
Yeah, and I suppose that's the hard part. Like I said before, you are safe in your science, you know all about that, and then you have to look up such things. And you also have in London. I mean, sometimes you mentioned the tube. Sometimes it's faster when you walk than taking the tube, and you probably only know that if you have been there and got
Right,
on the tube.
exactly.
Yeah,
And the different stops and,
yeah,
where they
exactly.
went and
Yeah, oh,
but
that's
that was helpful because I
yeah,
had been there and I did take the tube
yeah,
and I did take the Euro under
yeah,
to get
yeah, and
from London
the
to
channel.
Paris. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
the channel, yeah.
yeah.
So I had a sense of what that was and where you would come out and end up and
I sup
thankfully. I don't know, that's what's gonna be hard with the next book. I'm gonna have to start going
ah.
more places to I have to come to Austria.
Maybe because you know
Uh-huh.
that Vienna has always been right smack in the middle of spy activity during the Cold War. Maybe even now, who
Mhm.
knows?
Right.
A rumor has it that even though we were or are a neutral country, right, we had the Iron Curtain right next to us, so it was a meeting point for spies.
Mhm. Mhm.
Very well-known fact, supposedly, and I'm not just talking about the third man.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe that'll have to play into the next book, we'll see.
Maybe it should. And may I ask about the creative writing community or the writing community Mm. as a whole? I mean, did you have or do you have contacts? Did you do workshops? Uh, like you said, you are a scientist, and science writing helped you a lot with writing this book. But again, for the creative parts of your book, did you have any contacts? Do you have any contacts? Your family, like you said, they helped a little bit with ideas, maybe also beta reading. But what about the writing community, the fiction writing community?
I did, absolutely. As I was writing it, I started going to some writers' conferences in New York City. I went
Mm,
to one in Florida in Algonquin, a smaller one where we had other authors that they would read part of your book and they would critique it and give you ideas, and that was extraordinarily helpful because I was really coming into a new field that I had almost no expertise in at all, and so I definitely had to learn. I mean, a lot of it was self-taught. There's a lot of good
mhm,
blogs and things you can watch on YouTube to learn, but I did go to, a couple workshops
mhm,
in New York City and writers' conferences and met with other writers, and it was nice. You kinda felt like you're in your tribe, or with your
mm,
people. And then they did. It was, I remember it was like sitting on the hot seat because they would just tear it apart. That wasn't the original title for it. I was going to call it like CRISPR Cassiopeia or something like that because there's the constellation
mhm,
Cassiopeia that looks like
mhm,
the W. And they're like, "What? You can't call it that. What that means? What? Do nobody even knows what that means." And I was like, "Okay, Nick say." So they were kind of vicious. You kind of really they didn't hold back. No bars hold about um just the writing and that was kind of the school of hard knocks, to learn that way. But it was important. I needed that. I
mhm,
needed I needed that type of kind of education so that I could be a better writer.
mhm.
So
And who would you say is or was your hardest critic?
I would say the authors at the conferences, they definitely were. They were the biggest critics. Because they're in the industry and they're looking at it from their expertise and
Mm,
because other people, just your friends and stuff, they're like, great job, Jennifer. Wow, that was really interesting. But it's the writers that know how stories do well being built with the
mm,
increasing the denouement and that they were the biggest critics. I would say that it was called the Algonquin conference, and it was smaller. It wasn't a lot of people, so it was just a
mhm,
small group of people, and we really got kind of one-on-one independent analysis, and
Mhm.
editors and other authors
Mhm.
that and they really read part of your book and they ask you questions, and that's when I came back from that, I was like, "Okay, back to the drawing board."
Mm.
So,
And given what you just said, what would be your advice for other upcoming authors from the science community or anywhere else? What would be your most important advice for those people who would like to try their hand on writing fiction?
I would say just do it. Sit down and write what you love, write it, and then go and reach out to the community, to editors, educate yourself, and rewrite. And, I think just writing and rewriting until you get it to where you feel like it's finished would be the way to do it. So my advice is just start. Now that I've gone to a lot of these different conferences, and I'm going to a lot of, book fairs and so forth, and you hear different authors speak, and everybody's different. One author will say, "Oh, yes, I had to outline the entire novel and know how it ended in each chapter before I could start writing." Another author will say, "I just wrote page 1, and then I wrote page 2, and then I wrote page 3, and it just kinda came to me as I wrote it." So I think people do things differently, and it's just the way we're built. So do it the way you want to do it, but then make sure you get advice from the experts so that you can, and have beta readers and have editors so that they can really tweak it and see where you need to make it better. Because I doubt that anyone could just sit down and be a first time, a debut author, and just write it off the top of their head and have it be great the first time. I think it's going to take work and effort, and but, if you enjoy it, it doesn't feel like work. This isn't my day job. This is kind of my fun job. I'm not gonna quit my day job because I love that job too, but this was like, it didn't feel laborious to me. It felt kind of fun to me to write this, and have the characters in my head, and like, "Oh, what could they do next? Or where would they go next? Or how is this gonna play out?" It was a lot. It was enjoyable.
I have two more questions. First,
Sure.
first one is, what would be your, or how would you describe your writing process? You said there are those with the spreadsheets, there are those with the ideas, planners versus pantsers. How would you describe your writing process? And the second one is a question other authors have wondered about, or I had some who said, I always thought it's strange, people saying that. But did your character, your main character, or maybe other characters, watch over your shoulder while you were writing and telling you how to do it differently?
Okay, so for question number one, I would say I was middle of the road. So I didn't have a spreadsheet or a full outline, but I definitely had ideas of where the story was going and what some of the main characters were going to be and how the whole thing was going to resolve. But I didn't have it down to, like, the bullet points of what chapter is gonna be. It wasn't that organized, but I had a very general idea of where I wanted to go, and then I kinda just took it as it came. Interestingly, when I completed it the first time, it was about 70,000 words, and in the book business, they don't go by pages, they go by words, and that wasn't enough. I learned as a novice that for a fiction book like this, it should be at least 80 to 90,000 words. So I had to write another 20,000 words about what happened next, and that was not something that I had intended on initially. I also rewrote the first chapter like 3 times, completely different openings, because it wasn't the way it needed to be initially. It wasn't really catching anyone's attention until about the 3rd time, and I switched some other parts around too. So I'm kinda middle of the road. I'm not someone that just sits down and writes the first page and then it all comes to me. I needed to have a bit of a roadmap to where it was going, but it wasn't down to, a spreadsheet or bullet points or anything like that. With the second question, was the main character, hovering over my shoulder? Yeah, I mean, I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would be so engrossed with my characters, like, what would this character say or what would he do? And they kind of were based on people. So I have one character, Edwin, who the main character meets at the large research institution in Bar Harbor, Maine, and he's kind of a he's he's not a scientist. He's one of the workers. He cleans the cages and he takes very good care of things. And he has a little bit of a developmental learning disability or a delay, but they become great friends. And he really watches out for Aaliyah. And in my mind, he was Lenny from Of Mice and Men. I just had that person in my head as I wrote that. Her sidekick, her roommate who was real fun loving. There's the roommate in the book Crazy Rich Asians that came out in the movie, and that's the person I had in my head. Not that she was Asian, but just that kind of fun loving, quirky, quick witted kind of person. That's sort of the person that I had in my head. So as I was writing this, definitely all these characters were based off of something in my collective consciousness, and they were with me. And it's like when you read a good book, it kind of stays with you for a while. I just read a good book by Adriana uh, Trigolani. I'm getting her last name wrong, and like those characters stay with you for a while. And while you're writing, I think all of my characters just were with me. Like I said, sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd think of something, and I'd have to just jot it down right away or get up and write it so I wouldn't forget because they were kind of constantly always with me. So it's been a really fun ride.
I can imagine. And since you said it's a lot about speculation, speculative fiction, suppose we're going to get you a TV show contract. And over the last, I would say, 10 years, there has been a very big interest in dystopian themes.
Mhm.
Unlike before, I think in the past it was more utopian. These days it's more dystopian. Um, would you say that your book, then, if we would turn it into a TV show, it has to be more utopian than dystopian?
Yes, as it ends now, the second book could become more dystopian,
Mm.
but as it ends now, I don't really wanna give it away, but
Yeah, of course
it
not.
doesn't yeah, it doesn't she's able to thwart her adversaries, and so at that point, it doesn't get dystopian yet, but,
Mm.
you know, the next book could get very dystopian if we want it to go that way.
Do you think it's something also that reflects the current mood? But which is strange because when I say utopian in the past, when I think of utopia, I always think of shows like Star Trek. And for me, it's absolutely utopian. It's this positive outlook, although it was set in a time where, you know, the Cold War was hanging over our heads, and we had these blocks, West and East, and there was always this underlying threat of a war and so on. And yet we had this outlook of things getting better. And we would
Mhm.
have assumed, or we would assume, I mean, at least where we live, it's rather peaceful, or it has been rather peaceful over the last 20 years, say. And yet there is this interest in this dystopian, dark outlook of the world of the future. So you couldn't really say it's a reflection of reality. Or is it?
I don't know. We in the United States at this particular time are a little bit nervous about some of the way things are going. So I do think
Yeah.
it is a bit of a reflection. You know, I
Yeah.
think about there was a movie that came out, Don't Look Up, a year or two ago, where it was about a scientist who realizes that an asteroid is hitting, and that did not end well.
Mm.
But they basically show that the scientists, they know what's going on, but the politicians poo-poo it, and they don't and the rich guys get in their spaceship and go off and leave everybody else for their demise, or even the Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale. That book, it wasn't as bad as the net whatever the streaming service it's on. When I was started to watch that, I almost couldn't watch it anymore because it
Mm.
was so awful. I was like,
Mm.
"Oh my gosh."
Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale, it's scary.
Really is. Yeah. And then you start to think, like, could it happen like this? Whereas when you first read it, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, it's total fiction." And then the more you get into it, the more it gets a little bit scarier.
And reality is even scarier, like I said before. I mean, we had books like 1984, and when you look at how everything works these days, I mean, Orwell didn't have a clue, did he?
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm thinking about artificial intelligence now
Yeah.
too. That's another one. Can
Mm.
work for really wonderful things, but we need to be careful with that too.
Put it on a leash, use it in the correct way, just like the science you spoke about. Are our politicians really equipped to do that? I'm afraid not.
Well, my hope is that maybe by writing, I mean, one of my taglines now is science through storytelling. And the hope is to, through books like this, if just people who are non-scientists, they read it because it's interesting and intriguing, and maybe, yes, someday if somebody picks it up and does a Netflix series on it and they watch it and they're like, oh, this is what CRISPR is, and maybe we need to be informed and educated and aware of this new thing that's happening, that is going on in laboratories all across the United States and in research trials, but um, we don't know what the downside is, because I think there's a lot of people that are very educated and that stay up on it, and then there's a lot of people that aren't, and it just depends where you are. I was at the end of April, I was at a big book festival in Los Angeles, California, at University of Southern California. A lot of people knew what CRISPR was. In the Midwest, my neighborhood, the people who know about it would be like the high school kids that maybe have learned about it in biology class, some of the husbands who might know about it, not because they know what it is, but they know about investing. There's like CRISPR Therapeutics, so
Mm.
they would know, they kind of know what it is.
Mhm.
But so it just depends, where you are. There's a lot of people who are up on it, well, like anything. And there's a lot of people who just have no idea whatsoever. So I think I can reach the people who maybe aren't in the science field through a story.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully. I mean, like I said at the beginning, transgender, transgenic, who cares?
Yeah.
It's nearly the same, isn't it? I mean, this is uh, Jennifer, you touched a little bit upon your plans. Book 2 is in the making?
Not on paper yet, no. It's what I've been doing. The book, it hasn't been a full year since the book has been out
Mm.
yet, and I've been going to a lot of, different book festivals and, doing book signings and things like that. So I'm kinda, my time between my real job and just starting to do some promotion with this book, and
Yeah.
I'm not doing the promotion I should be. People are saying to me, "You should be on your Instagram and TikTok every 3 days posting something." And I'm like, "Okay, that's not happening." So I do think I wanna spend a little bit of time with this book before I start, thinking about the next one.
Yeah.
I mean, there are thoughts. I have some things written down, and mostly it's on ideas that people give me that I meet. When I say to them, or at a book club, I'll go to a book club and say, "Well, what do you think should?" Because it, like I said, it leaves you on a cliffhanger, and
Yeah.
people have great ideas, and they love to talk about it. They love to be creative and say, "Oh, you should do this or you should do that," and so I am enjoying that. I do think there'll be a second book. I just am not quite sure where it's going to go at this point. But at this point, I'm kind of still working on the first, just getting the
Mm.
word out about the first one.
Yeah. Understandable and enjoying the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely
That's one of the
understandable.
first questions. Like you said, I get 2 major questions. I get, "Are you gonna write another one?" That's like the very first thing out of people's mouth. "Well, are you gonna write another one?" And the other is, "Who are the characters based off? Is this true? Is this about you? What, like, how much of this comes from your own experience?" A lot of people ask that question.
I didn't wanna ask that in this way because usually it's not.
Mhm.
Because although there are some similarities, like you said, write what you know. That's sound advice. Although you shouldn't be stuck on this advice because otherwise you wouldn't have any other genres like fantasy or sci-fi.
Right, exactly.
but understandable. Yeah. Jennifer, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Well, I would just, I thank you for having me. We've had a great discussion. And I guess I would just say stay open minded and read lots of different types of books. And sometimes books that you think you might not be interested in, you'll find out that you like. So just stay open minded and keep reading.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. Jennifer, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Edith. I appreciate it.
Please wait for me in the green room. I'll be with you shortly. Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope you will tune in for another episode. Until next time.